Saxby to move the motion.
I beg to move that this House has considered the sustainability of burning trees for energy generation. Thank you, Mr Gray. It is a pleasure to be serving under your chair, and thank you to the Backbench Business Committee for finding time to secure this important debate. In my mind, today's debate is about changing scientific understanding as we decarbonise our energy supply. The burning of wood as a renewable energy source has been adopted by the UK and the EU as a sustainable option to replace coal. Here in the UK, we subsidise the use of biomass to generate energy by £1 billion. However, over recent years, there have been serious concerns raised by scientists and industry about the actual benefit of burning wood for energy. I have asked for this debate so that we can have a discussion about how taxpayers' money is being spent and whether at this time of global energy disruption we are investing in the best forms of energy generation for our planet and for our energy security. Biomass became prominent when coal-fired power stations were converted into biomass power stations. This was subsidised to aid the phase-out of coal and originated in a time when biomass was cheaper than renewables such as wind and solar and had perceived additional benefits such as providing consistent, reliable power. However, now Drax is the UK's biggest single-point source of CO2 emissions. Due to the technology installed, the power station must run predominantly on wood pellets and has only limited capacity for non-woody biomass such as energy crops and organic waste. The whole life cycle emissions grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour for solar are 41, for wind they're 11 to 12, and for coal they're 948. For forest biomass, it is 1,079. This is far from the assumed carbon neutral outcome. The UK produces roughly 12% of its energy from biomass and 3% from coal. The UK's emissions of carbon have not dropped at the same rate as our reduction of coal would indicate. The reality is that there is currently more carbon being put into our atmosphere than there was when we were burning coal. The difference between the idea that it is renewable and the reality comes from two misrepresentations. Both of them come about from the wrong approach to the accounting of the carbon output. The emissions from cutting down trees are attributed to the land use sector rather than the energy generation sector. As we import the majority of our wood pellets, we are exporting our carbon emissions. Whilst this may look good, it does not achieve anything, as we all share our atmosphere and the effects carbon emissions cause. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change allows this zero rating of emissions based on the idea that every tree will be replanted and its replacement will harness the same level of carbon as its predecessor. This, unfortunately, has proven not to be the case. Many studies have shown that the carbon payback times forest biomass are decades or centuries away, depending on the type of forest cut down to produce the wood pellets. We are entering a crunch point on our work to limit the effects of climate change, with tipping points in the melting of sea and glacial ice, sea level rises, ocean acidification, permafrost melt, and the Amazon biome. We do not have the time to wait decades or centuries for that carbon to be reabsorbed and sequestered, nor does it fit in with the goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. Trees only grow in their carbon storing potential as they age. There is a very minimal decline in their efficiency as they photosynthesize and store carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. But this decline is far outweighed by their sheer size and capacity. A study carried out by 38 researchers across 15 countries measured 400 species across 6 continents. It found that 97% of trees grew more quickly as they aged and absorbed more carbon year on year. If a tree's diameter grows 10 times as large, it will undergo a 100-fold increase in leaf mass and a 50-fold to 100-fold increase in total leaf area. Our forests are still the largest remover of carbon. One study found that across forests of all ages and types across the world, that half of the carbon is stored in the largest 1% of trees when measured by diameter. As trees age, they also store more carbon in the soil, so it is not just our canopy that we are looking at, it is the carbon stored in the earth itself, much as we need to consider our peatlands or blue carbon stored in the seabed. The other issue with the accounting of emissions from the burning of biomass for energy is the carbon associated with the supply chain of sourcing the wood pellets required. The industry sources wood pellets from North America, Eastern Europe, the Baltics, and historically Russia. COVID and the war in Ukraine have significantly disrupted supply chains and put more pressure on available forests. Drax sources most of its wood pellets from North America. A BBC Panorama documentary has cast doubt on the claim that it just uses waste wood and has suggested that primary forests are harvested and timber quality is burnt, wood is then burnt as biomass. The Dogwood Alliance in Mississippi has also been tracking the logging of forests in the southeastern United States and the conversion of whole trees into wood pellets. This is one of the most biodiverse areas of the United States, and that is another downside, the burning of wood for energy. These older and more mature forests are home to a greater diversity of flora and fauna. These wood pellets are then shipped to the UK on enormous ships that take 21 days in transit. Drax receives 17 deliveries of wood pellets a day, and the plant operates 24 hours a day, 6 days a week. The energy required to transport these pellets adds to their life cycle emissions and uses up the very fossil fuels they are supposed to replace. This is not an attempt to discredit one company. This is about us better understanding what is actually going on in the name of renewable fuels and asking that a more rigorous analysis of the carbon costs of this form of power production is fully conducted before we assume, because at one level it makes sense as trees grow back, that we really are moving to a lower carbon generating fuel supply and that any subsidy that supports that reflects the true carbon cost of what is supposed to be carbon neutral. I would also like to raise concerns with the industry's attempts to store more carbon and attempt to deliver negative emissions and remove carbon from the atmosphere. Whilst a laudable goal, their bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, known as BECCS systems, which is included in the UK's current net zero pathway, it is important to note that this is based on the flawed accounting that calls burning biomass carbon neutral, and it has a number of risks and barriers. BECCS is the process of capturing and permanently storing underground the carbon emitted by biomass energy generation. The carbon capture rate is not 100%. Research from Chatham House indicates it is about 76%, and to maximise capture energy needs to be expended. The options are to maximise power generation or maximise CO2 capture. It will also be incredibly expensive. Power stations are seeking new subsidies to develop BECCS. It is projected to require £31.7 billion over 25 years, the equivalent of £500 per person in the UK. It is also incredibly land hungry. It would require an area roughly 1.5 times the size of Wales to grow enough bioenergy crops to meet BECCS demand. That is 17% of the UK's arable land. As we have seen recently, global events have shown how important a reliable food supply is. The UK cannot reduce its domestic production of quality produce. There is already a challenge to find the right balance of land for farming, living, energy production and industry. To use such a large percentage of our land on a form of expensive and unsustainable energy generation, in my mind, would be the wrong approach. The Climate Change Committee has called on the government to support domestic biomass supply in order to meet expected carbon removal requirements for the industry. However, is that the answer? The UK is about to face a severe shortage of wood and is one of the least densely forested countries in Europe at only 13% of land area. And the idea that before using that wood in industry we should burn it flies in the face of the basics of reducing emissions. At the heart of what we are aiming to do, we should reduce or use virgin products, reuse where possible, recycle where not, and only look at using them for energy generation once they have become waste. When we log forests for wood products, the carbon remains sequestered for however long that product lasts, possibly decades or longer. I must declare an interest as chair of the APPG for wood panelling, but the wood panelling industry is a UK success story, with GVA in excess of 850 million per annum and an ability to only meet 65% of the UK demand for wood panel products. It supports approximately 7,500 jobs across the UK with an average salary of £36,000, significantly above the UK average. The industry has made great strides in supporting our net zero by 2050 targets and has had some success with efficient and carbon negative processes. The wood panelling manufacturing sector uses over 25% of the 11 million tonnes of wood delivered from UK forestry every year in total. The rise of the wood fuel sector, which itself consumes around 25% of the UK annual wood basket, is subsidised and has distorted this market, creating shortages in domestic supply. Manufacturing operations rely upon the sustainable supply of wood materials such as forest round wood and thinnings, sawmill products and recycled wood, which are in increasingly restricted supply, given that the UK will reach peak wood availability in the early 2030s, followed by a forecasted and sustained drop soon afterwards. We need to plant more trees, especially if we are going to carry on relying on biomass for our energy generation. The closure of the Renewable Heat Incentive Scheme to new entrants in 2021 was a welcome decision. Now is the time to transition to future support schemes that most strategically target taxpayers' money and ensure a level playing field for all wood users. I ask the Minister to ensure that when the biomass strategy is released, it does not contain a new tariff-based incentivisation scheme similar to the Renewable Heat Incentive. I also ask the Minister to clarify if biomass is supported by the Contracts for Difference subsidies. In 2020, the Government announced that it would exclude coal to biomass conversion projects from future rounds, starting with allocation round 4. In AR4, dedicated biomass with combined heat and power were eligible to compete.
Does she agree with me that it's actually extraordinary that the biomass industry is asking for a combined CFD that would combine biomass production plus carbon capture and storage?
Thank you, Mr. Gray. And I do indeed agree with my honourable colleague that this is part of the confusion in this entire strategy, and we do need urgent clarification. As in AR4, dedicated biomass with combined heat and power were eligible to compete, though no contracts were awarded. And the announcement of AR5, which is starting in March 23, has not come with any clarity on whether biomass will be eligible for this round. I would just like to finish by saying that this government has done great work as we transition to net zero by 2050. But in my mind, further investment in biomass is clearly the wrong strategy. Not only does it continue to contribute carbon to our atmosphere when we can now invest in significantly cleaner energy, but it takes away from flourishing British businesses and exports our problems overseas. When the biomass strategy is released, I hope that this mounting evidence will be considered and we can continue to increase investment in more sustainable energy sources rather than pursuing this path.